Hey guys, tonight we begin with something a bit different. Not kings or queens, at least not in the conventional sense. Tonight, we're drifting slowly into the desert, into the dust and heat, to meet the people who actually built the pyramids. Yes, the massive, geometrically precise, ridiculously ambitious stone monuments that make you wonder how anyone thought, sure, let's pile millions of tons of rock on top of each other and call it eternal. Now, we've all seen the fancy illustrations. Pharaohs lounging in silk robes, being fanned by attendants, maybe having a pyramid in the background like some desert Pinterest board. But that's not who we're talking about. No, tonight, our focus is on the ones whose hands bore the work, whose backs ached in the sun, whose lives were measured in the slow, monotonous rhythm of hauling stone. They are rarely mentioned in history books outside of passing references, maybe a footnote in a dusty textbook that says, workers likely suffered, died, or maybe enjoyed it. We don't know. Let's fix that tonight. Gently, with no sudden excitement. Just a slow float into their sand-blown existence. First, picture the environment. Ancient Egypt was hot. Really hot. Like all day, all year, relentless sun hot. And if that wasn't enough, there was the Nile. Now, you might think, oh, water. That sounds nice. But this was a river that flooded seasonally, so the workers' lives revolved around it, like it was a living, unpredictable clock. During flood season, fields were underwater. The air was humid, and mosquitoes were everywhere. Not ideal conditions for moving multi-ton blocks of limestone or granite. Let's talk about the people themselves. Contrary to popular belief, most of the pyramid builders were not slaves, at least not in the Hollywood sense of whips and chains. Archaeological evidence like worker villages, tomb inscriptions, and leftover breadcrumbs, yes, breadcrumbs, suggests these were skilled laborers, craftsmen, and seasonal workers. Some were farmers during the Nile's flood, who traded their spare months of labor for food, beer, and a tiny bit of prestige. And yes, beer. Lots of beer. The ancient Egyptians believed it was essential, not just for morale, but for nutrition. A little barley liquid to lubricate weary muscles and quiet grumbling stomachs. I like to imagine these guys, hauling a 2-ton block, thinking, just 5 more meters, and then I can have another sip. The villages themselves were fascinating in a mundane way. Not exactly paradise, but not hell either. Long rows of mud brick barracks, communal kitchens, open-air latrines, and areas for artisans to sharpen tools or carve smaller stones. It was, by all accounts, very organized. The workers were divided into teams, each with its own captain, who oversaw productivity with quiet authority. No need for dramatic shouting matches, just a lot of routine, a lot of repetition. Some captains had amusing titles, like Overseer of the Beaten Paths, or Chief of the Sliding Stones, which probably sounded much more impressive in ancient Egyptian. Of course, the job came with responsibility. If your team dropped a block, misaligned a course, or complained too much, you were on the hook, figuratively. Some texts even suggest a bit of literal danger, but nothing cinematic. Mostly, just awkward reprimands and the occasional sore back. Now, let's slow down and consider what a typical day looked like for these builders. They woke early, which in the Egyptian sun probably meant before the sun wakes you. Breakfast would consist of bread, onions, maybe some fish from the Nile if they were lucky, and beer. Always beer. Then the team would march. or rather slowly trudge, toward the construction site, dragging, levering, or sliding massive stones over prepared pathways. Ropes, wooden sleds, mud lubricants. Ingenious, simple, and exhausting. Imagine walking through heat, dust sticking to your sweat, hauling heavy stone while trying not to think about the fact that you'll repeat this for decades. And yet, somehow, they did it. Not because they were particularly heroic, or especially masochistic, but because it was what they had to do. Life was organized around monumental work. Breaks were minimal, but food and drink were plentiful enough to sustain the labor. Archaeologists found bread made in large communal ovens, and even the occasional luxury items, like onions for medicinal purposes or dates for energy. Some of the stones were carved on site, while others were quarried far away, requiring careful logistics. Teams specialized. Some prepared the stones, others dragged them, and still others leveled the ground. It was a slow-motion ballet, very repetitive, and for the builders, very mundane. And that's kind of the point. Life was simple. Painful, yes. Repetitive, absolutely, but not exciting. Which, if we're honest, makes it perfect for a bedtime history story. Of course, not everything was perfect. Injuries were common. The heavy stones, tools, and sun meant back pain, splinters, cuts, and occasional crushed fingers. Some skeletons show signs of healed fractures, suggesting care from fellow workers. Medicine was rudimentary but existent. Herbal remedies, splints, massage, and more beer. Alcohol as medicine. Works for some people, apparently. Sleep was another factor. Workers returned to the barracks at sunset, exhausted and dusty. Mud brick walls, straw mats, communal sleeping spaces. There wasn't much privacy, which sounds unpleasant, but they were probably used to it. And interestingly, some workers were buried near the pyramids, suggesting a kind of honor or recognition. Not everyone, of course. Life expectancy was not generous. Many likely died young from overwork, disease, or just bad luck. But a few reached old age, and some even prospered enough to afford family tombs nearby. A subtle, quiet reward for years of monotonous labor. Let's float over to another curious detail. Hierarchy among workers. Not every worker was equal. Some were artisans, skilled stone carvers who could turn granite into smooth perfection. Some were transport specialists, experts in dragging and lifting. And then there were the seasonal farmers, untrained but strong, who followed orders and learned on the job. And yes, hierarchy existed among them, complete with petty rivalries, small privileges, and the occasional minor scandal. Imagine arguing over who gets the slightly larger loaf of bread or whose turn it is to haul the final stones before sunset. Small dramas, quietly unfolding in the desert. The tools themselves deserve a moment. Copper chisels, stone hammers, wooden sleds, ropes from flax. Nothing fancy, nothing revolutionary. Simple tools for monumental tasks. And yet, they worked. Which is a lesson in patience, persistence, and probably mild frustration. These tools, combined with organization, discipline, and careful observation of physics, mud as a lubricant, rolling logs as rollers, ramps at precise angles, allowed humans to do something remarkable. But for the individual worker, it was just another day. Drag, carve, slide, rest, repeat. And let's not forget the weather. Extreme heat in summer, unpredictable rain during the Nile's flood season, dust storms that could strip the skin raw, sunburns, dehydration, blisters. Some workers might have thought, at least occasionally, that building a pyramid was a terrible idea. And yet, here we are, thousands of years later, still marveling at the structure. The builders, meanwhile, were probably marveling at how much their feet hurt. Food and drink, once again, were central. Daily rations included bread, beer, onions, and occasionally fish or dates. Archaeologists found enormous quantities of bread ovens near pyramid sites, enough to feed thousands. And beer, of course, the staple, thick, filling, slightly alcoholic, perfect for morale. Some evidence even suggests workers enjoyed mild luxuries compared to peasants elsewhere, simply because pharaohs wanted the monuments completed efficiently. An interesting mix of exploitation and care. Not heroic, not cruel, just practical. It's also worth noting the social structure in these villages. Families weren't always present. Many workers were single men, though some families followed seasonal schedules. Hierarchy among workers extended into social hierarchy. Carvers might have privileges, better sleeping spots, slightly better food, or the ability to trade small favors. Captains had their own perks, oversight of teams, the right to delegate minor punishments, and, of course, bragging rights when a block was moved without incident. Small rewards in a vast, monotonous desert. And now, a quiet observation. The pace. Life in pyramid villages was slow, methodical, unchanging. It's almost hypnotic, imagining day after day of sun, sand, stones, and beer. Not exciting, not glamorous, not tragic in a dramatic sense. Just life. Slow, repetitive, exhausting. Human beings, day in and day out, doing something extraordinary without ever realizing how extraordinary it was. Let's consider one last thing for tonight: death. Inevitably, some workers didn't survive. Harsh conditions, accidents, disease. Evidence suggests some were buried on site near the work, in modest graves. Perhaps the pharaoh's planners felt it was appropriate. Die while building the eternal home of your king, and you too achieve a kind of quiet immortality. No fanfare, no statues, just stones, sand, and the gentle drifting of time. So, as we ease into the night, imagine walking through one of these worker villages. Mud brick walls glowing in the soft sunset, the smell of baking bread, the distant shimmer of the Nile, men resting, carving, laughing softly, and drinking their beer. Not heroes, not villains, just people, quietly living lives that left a mark on history, even if history mostly forgot their names. They built pyramids, not for fame, not for glory, not for drama, but because it was their work, their place in the rhythm of life. And in that quiet, monotone way, it is kind of beautiful. So, drifting gently onward from the laborers dragging stone under the relentless Egyptian sun, let's take a slow, unhurried look at the other figures who populated the pyramid-building world. Not the pharaoh, of course. He's comfortably distant, reclining in his palace, probably wondering why anyone would complain about hauling 2 tons of limestone in 40-degree heat. No, tonight we're floating down to the quieter tiers. The artisans, the captains, the people with slightly more privileges, slightly more responsibility, and slightly more opportunity to feel bored in a different way. Let's start with the artisans. These were the skilled workers, the quiet geniuses, if you will, whose hands transformed rough stone into smooth perfection. They carved hieroglyphs, decorative reliefs, and precision blocks that fit so snugly you couldn't slide a leaf between them. It might sound glamorous, but in reality, it was long, repetitive, painstaking work. Imagine standing in the desert, sun overhead, chiseling the same lotus flower over and over for weeks, maybe months. And of course, always careful not to ruin the block. A single mistake could mean starting over. Or worse, subtly being judged by your captain for sloppy workmanship. Artisans lived in slightly better conditions than the general laborers. Their barracks were similar, mud brick and straw mats, but they often had more shade, and some had access to simple comforts. Small personal tools, maybe a tiny stash of better quality bread. The pharaoh wanted their work precise, so keeping them fed and reasonably comfortable was practical, not noble, not indulgent, just enough to keep them from quitting or quietly resenting the entire enterprise. Now, life as an artisan had its social quirks. Skill conferred status. Skilled carvers might mentor others, pass down techniques, or quietly gloat when a less experienced worker chipped a block. There's subtle human comedy here, even in monotony. A slightly smug artisan, wiping sweat from his brow, muttering about rookie mistakes while the sun continues its relentless march across the sky. And yes, beer played a role here too. Even artisans needed to sip barley liquid to maintain focus and patience. Floating gently onward, we reach the captains. These were the supervisors, the ones who watched over dozens or hundreds of laborers. Their job was to coordinate teams, ensure productivity, and occasionally enforce minor discipline. Captains weren't cruel tyrants in any cinematic sense. Mostly they were people with slightly more authority and slightly less sand in their eyes. But their lives were not free of stress. They bore the responsibility of failure, which could be as mundane as a misaligned stone, or as boringly catastrophic as an underfed team. Imagine being responsible for 100 people, under a relentless sun, while they occasionally grumbled about the size of their bread rations. Captains needed patience. Lots of it. Captains were also the conduits between Pharaoh's planners and the workers. They might receive instructions on new ramps, stone placements, or ceremonial alignments. The pharaoh didn't micromanage, of course. He had advisors for that. But he cared about precision. The captain's day was a steady rhythm of marching teams, checking alignments, and occasionally giving a low-key reprimand. No, Ahmed, we do not drag it uphill sideways, because physics still exists. Small, quiet moments of authority. Slightly satisfying for the captain, mildly tiresome for everyone else. Let's drift over to an interesting, almost overlooked aspect. The temporary workers. These were often farmers, as I mentioned, whose fields were submerged during the Nile's annual flood. They came to the pyramids for work, traded labor for rations and beer, and returned to their farms afterward. Their presence made the workforce seasonal, fluctuating with the river. Some might think this was chaotic, but in reality, it provided a predictable rhythm. Farmers came, did the work, learned quickly, rested, and eventually returned home. Occasionally, they'd bring family, adding small bursts of social complexity, children running in the background, women cooking communal meals, elders observing quietly. The seasonal nature of these workers had another subtle effect: knowledge transfer. Experienced laborers and artisans often taught newcomers. A farmer might learn to carve small blocks or understand the subtleties of sliding a massive stone on a mud ramp. And when the next flood arrived, that knowledge returned home, diffused into local villages. Tiny ripples of skill spreading across the Nile Valley. Not revolutionary, not celebrated, just quietly effective. Now, a slow, gentle observation about the physical demands. The stones. Yes, the stones. Limestone, granite, basalt, duttile. Multi-ton, unforgiving, stubborn. And yet, somehow, they were moved, shaped, and stacked. Techniques included rollers, sleds, levers, mud lubrication, and careful teamwork. Each block was a mini-project in itself. Imagine coordinating dozens of people, aligning angles precisely, ensuring no one collapses under strain. Repetition made it meditative, almost hypnotic for some. Painful, yes. Exhausting, definite. But strangely rhythmical, like a daily mantra in stone. And then there's diet. I've mentioned beer, yes, but let's expand on it. Daily rations were surprisingly generous compared to other laboring populations. Bread, onions, fish when available, dates, and, yes, beer. The beer wasn't just a treat. It was a calorie-rich, mildly alcoholic nutritional supplement. Workers relied on it for energy, hydration, and morale. It's fascinating, really. The pharaohs' planners understood, even if subconsciously, that happy, well-fed workers were more efficient. Alcohol as productivity tool, not a party, just functional. We might also consider the small dramas in these villages. Humans, even in monotony, find ways to create narrative. Arguments over sleeping spots, petty jealousies among artisans, or the occasional humorous mishap. A stone rolling slightly off course. A donkey wandering into the barracks. Someone sneezing at an inopportune moment while lifting a block. Nothing life-altering. Nothing tragic. Just quietly human. Let's float now to hygiene. Yes, hygiene. Mud-brick villages weren't exactly modern. Communal latrines, dust everywhere, sweat, mud, and occasional Nile water. And yet, archaeological evidence shows surprisingly low levels of infection. Workers were hardy. Practical medicine existed. Herbal remedies, massage, splints for broken bones. Beer sometimes served a medicinal role, though historians debate how effective that actually was. And bathing? Seasonal, likely tied to the Nile, often a social activity rather than a personal ritual. So imagine a slightly grimy, sun-baked, tired workforce, enduring life with mild stoicism and a shared sense of purpose. Moving on, we can consider the rare rewards. Some artisans, captains, and exemplary workers earned tombs near the pyramid, small monuments acknowledging their contribution. Not lavish, not eternal glory, just recognition. And of course there was pride. Even in monotony, knowing you shaped something monumental, something that would last thousands of years, was satisfying. But satisfaction was quiet, subtle, easily overlooked by history, easily ignored by casual observers focused on Pharaoh. And death, softly again, was always present. Harsh conditions, heat, accidents. Evidence suggests a significant portion of workers didn't live long lives. Some skeletons show healed fractures, implying care from fellow workers. Others reveal persistent hardship, malnutrition, infection, worn joints. Yet, remarkably, many survived decades, enduring the desert. The work, the repetition, and sometimes achieving modest prosperity. A quiet testament to hum, and an endurance even without drama or fanfare. Now, let's consider the faint social ecosystem within the workforce. Workers formed informal alliances, friendships, rivalries. Some artisans quietly competed for the title of most precise carver. Captains jockeyed subtly for recognition from pharaohs' planners. Seasonal workers learned quickly and then bragged at home. Families occasionally joined, adding small bursts of warmth and distraction. The village wasn't static. It had rhythms, interactions, and subtle hierarchies, all flowing gently under the sun. And the sun itself deserves a moment of attention. Rising, setting, constant, relentless. The worker's lives were measured by its passage, by shadows stretching across the desert, by the slow movement of heat and light. Days merged into weeks, weeks into years. Repetition, monotony, subtle progression. A rhythm that is soothing, in a sleepy, almost hypnotic way, if you let it. Finally, let's drift over to the bigger picture, quietly, without urgency. These workers, artisans, captains, and seasonal farmers collectively created something extraordinary, not for themselves, not for fame, not for excitement, but because life dictated it, Pharaoh demanded it, society organized it. Stone by stone, day by day, block by block, they built a monument to human patience, persistence, and quiet endurance. And in doing so, they left traces of lives largely forgotten, tiny whispers in the sand that we can still feel, if we slowed down enough to notice. Imagine walking through a worker village at sunset. Mud brick barracks glowing softly, the smell of bread and communal ovens, men and women resting, talking quietly, sipping beer, cleaning tools. Perhaps an artisan slowly chiseling the final detail of a stone relief, while a captain checks alignment with a mild frown, and seasonal farmers relax after a long day's haul. Life is repetitive. Yes, dusty, sweaty, painful at times, but steady. And in that steadiness, perhaps, a kind of quiet beauty emerges. And that, gently floating, brings us to the end of this part. Not dramatic, not violent, not sensational. Just life, as it was, in the shadow of one of humanity's most enduring achievements. The pyramid stands, eternal and monumental, but the quiet rhythm of its builders, mud, sweat, stone, and barley beer, is equally remarkable, though far subtler. So, floating gently onward from captains and artisans, let's settle into the rhythm of the seasons. Yes, even in the desert, the Nile dictated time in a quiet, almost hypnotic way. For the pyramid builders, life wasn't just about moving stone. It was about moving stone in sync with the river, the sun, and the slow passing of mud. The Nile had a very particular schedule. Each year it flooded predictably, spilling over its banks and covering the farmland. For the farmers who doubled as seasonal workers, this meant that for months they were displaced from their field. And where did they go? You guessed it, the pyramid villages. The flood was not merely a nuisance, it was an organizing principle. Laborers, artisans, and seasonal farmers all synchronized their lives with the rise and fall of the river. Think of it as the ancient version of a corporate calendar, Koane. Flood season, Q2. Stone hauling, Q3. Farming. Except replace the corporate jargon with sand, sweat, and barley beer. During the flood, villages were bustling, relatively lively. Temporary workers arrived with families, bringing small touches of domesticity. Children ran through the alleys between mud brick barracks. Dogs chased geese. Women cooked communal meals. It wasn't a festival exactly, but it had a rhythm, a quiet energy. And when the flood subsided, many workers returned home, leaving the village quieter, emptier, more hypnotically repetitive. The ebb and flow of labor mirrored the ebb and flow of the river. A slow, soothing, predictable pattern. Now, let's pause to consider rituals. Because even in a work-focused, repetitive life, humans find ways to mark time and imbue meaning. Seasonal feasts, minor religious observances, and offerings to the gods were sprinkled throughout the workers' lives. These were simple, subtle ceremonies. A loaf of bread left at a shrine, a small beer offering to a minor deity, perhaps a chant or two to encourage safe lifting of heavy stones. Nothing dramatic, no fireworks. Just tiny gestures that gave structure to an otherwise monotonous existence. Artisans in particular had little rituals of their own. Carving a precise lotus flower or a hieroglyphic panel required focus, patience, and repetitive motion. Some would hum quietly. Others might tap a small rhythm with their tools, creating a subtle beat in the desert stillness. It was an unconscious meditation, really, a way to pass time while maintaining precision. And when a block was finally finished perfectly, there was a quiet nod of satisfaction among peers. A small triumph, almost invisible, yet profoundly human. Captains, of course, had rituals of oversight. They'd check alignments, adjust ramps, and gently supervise teams with a practiced monotony. Some captains had favorite routes for walking through the worksite, inspecting stone placement in a specific order, almost ceremoniously. Not because Pharaoh cared, but because structure was comforting. Repetition, in the context of chaos and dust, offered a minor sense of control. Now, floating over to the workers' quarters, let's linger on the everyday life that sustained them. Mud brick barracks were simple, rectangular rooms, straw mats for sleeping, communal ovens for bread, a small area for cooking or tool maintenance. Privacy was minimal, but social cohesion was high. People shared resources, helped each other with injuries, and occasionally traded small favors. Perhaps someone lent a knife for carving or shared extra dates. Life was collaborative by necessity, gentle and cooperative in a practical, unglamorous way. Food, as ever, was central. Red in beer dominated, with onions, leeks, and occasional fish or fowl supplementing. Archaeologists found enormous quantities of bread ovens near pyramid sites, enough to feed thousands. And beer, of course, was calorie-rich and mildly alcoholic, ideal for labor under a relentless sun. The workers' diet was repetitive but adequate, sustaining muscle, bone, and morale. It's interesting to note that Pharaoh's planners understood that happy, fed workers were more efficient. So, in a way, beer was not just leisure, it was productivity management. Let's float over to leisure, or what passed for it. Outside of work, artisans might carve small decorative objects, play minor games with peers, or exchange stories. Workers might rest in the shade, chat quietly, or observe the patterns of the desert sky. Children occasionally played in safe corners of the village. Life wasn't full of excitement, but small comforts existed. Minor jokes, brief conversations, or the occasional indulgence in an extra piece of bread or a slightly stronger beer. Humans, even in repetitive labor, seek moments of quiet amusement. And these moments, while invisible to history, mattered profoundly to the people themselves. The social hierarchy among workers remained subtle but persistent. Skilled artisans held quiet prestige, captains commanded mild authority, seasonal laborers contributed strength but had less influence. Small rivalries existed. Disputes over sleeping arrangements, arguments about tool sharing, or minor pride contests among carvers. Nothing monumental. Nothing tragic. Just the gentle ebb and flow of human interaction. We can also consider the artisan's hobbies, though hobby is generous. Some practiced intricate carvings on small stones, experimenting with forms beyond the immediate needs of the pyramid. Others polished small pieces of jewelry or ceremonial objects, perhaps as personal exercises or minor tokens of skill. Again, nothing dramatic. No genius revelations, just quiet engagement, and ways to occupy the mind while hands remained busy. And of course, these small activities reinforced skill, subtly improving their craft without anyone noticing. Now, let's drift gently toward the quieter side of the workforce, the elderly and infirm. Not everyone could endure decades of stone hauling. Some workers aged gracefully into slower roles, advising teams, supervising minor tasks, maintaining tools, or providing minor instruction to apprentices. Others, less fortunate, suffered fatigue, joint wear, or chronic injuries. Archaeologists found skeletons with clear signs of arthritis and healed fractures, a quiet testament to long repetitive labor. These aged workers often held informal respect, their experience valued even if their physical contributions waned. Death, softly, was always present. Accidents, illness, and the relentless desert sun claimed lives. Some workers were buried on site, near the pyramids, in modest graves. Small markers, sometimes inscribed with their names or roles, indicate subtle acknowledgement. Not glory, not fanfare, just quiet recognition. And perhaps that was enough. Work, life, and death blended into a slow, hypnotic rhythm, measured in the passage of sun and stone, sand and sweat. We can also consider minor artistic rivalries, almost imperceptible. Carvers might compete to create slightly better inscriptions, finish reliefs more efficiently, or develop smoother surfaces. Captains subtly noted these differences, perhaps rewarding superior performance with better sleeping arrangements or slightly more breadth. Such minor competitions were quiet, socially contained, and often entirely invisible to outsiders, but they shaped the rhythm of life. Subtle human drama under the relentless sun. Let's now float over to sanitation and hygiene. Mud-brick villages had communal latrines. Water was scarce. Dust was omnipresent. Yet, surprisingly, evidence suggests relatively low levels of infection. Practical remedies existed. Herbal treatment, ents, poultices, massages. Beer sometimes played a medicinal role, calming discomfort or supplementing hydration. Daily cleanliness was relative. Washing in Nile water, brushing dust from skin, minor grooming rituals. Not indulgent, not glamorous. Functional, quiet, and human. Finally, let's drift to the quiet acknowledgments of labor. Pharaohs, planners, and society rarely noted individual workers. Most names are lost to time, yet archaeology reveals subtle markers, inscriptions, small tombs, communal burial sites, and material remnants. These indicate an awareness, perhaps subconscious, of the value of labor. Workers, captains, and artisans left traces that whisper across millennia. Names forgotten, lives uncelebrated, but rhythms preserved in stone, sand, and quiet history. So, drifting gently toward the close of this section, imagine a seasonal village in full operation. Mud brick barracks glow softly in the morning sun. Bread ovens fill the air with aroma. Artisans chisel quietly. Captains walk slowly among teams. Seasonal laborers haul stone with practiced precision. Children run in safe corners. The Nile glimmers in the distance. Dust swirls gently. Sweat glistens on foreheads. Beer is sipped. Conversations are low. And through it all, the slow rhythm of life continues, almost hypnotically, under the relentless sun. And as evening falls, workers retire to their barracks. Mud brick walls glowing faintly in fading light. Tools clean. Beer consumed. Stories shared quietly. Minor disputes resolved. A gentle rhythm of life maintained. Steady, unremarkable, quietly profound. The desert, the Nile, the pyramids, and the people who built them, all moving in unhurried harmony. And so, softly, gently, we leave the village for now. No drama, no suspense, no heroes in the cinematic sense. Just humans living quietly, repeatedly, patiently, leaving traces in stone, sand, and subtle history. Their existence, hypnotically mundane, is perhaps the most remarkable story of L. Not because of grandeur or glory, but because of persistence, endurance, and quiet, patient creation. Floating gently onward, let's now settle into another subtle rhythm of life among the pyramid builders. Death, remembrance, and the quiet acknowledgement of labor. Because while pharaohs enjoyed eternal monuments, ordinary workers had subtler ways of leaving traces. Burial practices among the pyramid workforce were simple, practical, and occasionally marked by small gestures of respect. Not every laborer earned a tomb. Most were interred in modest graves near the worksite. Some skeletons indicate careful positioning, perhaps an echo of the rituals observed by their society. Tools might accompany the body, or a small loaf of bread, or a clay cup. These were not luxurious tombs. They were functional, personal, quietly honoring a life of steady labor. Archaeologists have found that some burial sites were organized in clusters, suggesting a recognition of social units within the workforce. Teams of workers might share sections. Captains had slightly larger plots, and skilled artisans occasionally earned marginally better markers. Nothing lavish, no gold, no elaborate statues. Just simple clay, stone, and placement, a gentle whisper across millennia. We existed, we worked, we contributed. Let's float over to the private lives of artisans, a topic rarely examined in detail. Artisans, unlike seasonal laborers, often lived in the village year-round. Their days were dominated by carving, shaping, and precision work, but their nights and off hours allowed minor personal expression. Some decorated their own quarters with small carvings, doodles on spare stone, or simple paintings. Others might play soft rhythms on tools, tapping patterns into the walls or floors, a quiet meditation, a personal ritual, or perhaps a way to maintain focus during long, repetitive work. Artisans also developed reputations quietly. A carver known for smooth lines or precise angles might gain in it formal respect, influencing minor social hierarchies. Apprentices learned under them, observing tiny techniques passed down slowly over months and years. These skill transfers weren't dramatic or celebrated in the larger society, but within the village, they mattered deeply. Subtle expertise, quietly accumulated, preserved in stone for generations. Now, Let's consider the slow rhythm of mistakes and mishaps, which were inevitable. Even the most skilled artisan occasionally misjudged a chisel strike. A block could chip, a relief could be slightly misaligned, or a ramp could become slippery with mud. In response, captains would gently correct, peers might offer advice, and the work continued. These small errors weren't dramatic disasters. They were part of the quiet ebb of daily labor. Learning, correcting, retrying. Repeat. Day after day. Stone by stone. Seasonal laborers also contributed minor rituals and quirks. Some carried personal charms, small amulets, or tokens to ensure safe lifting or good fortune under the sun. Others whispered prayers to minor deities, or performed small gestures of thanks to the Nile for steady water. These actions were subtle, personal, often invisible to outsiders, yet they shaped the internal rhythm of the village, providing small moments of psychological comfort amidst repetitive work. And food continued to play a central role. Bread, beer, onions, fish when available, and occasional dates. Meals were communal, simple, functional. Eating together reinforced social cohesion, offered minor comfort, and allowed the workforce to rest quietly. The smell of bread ovens, rising steam from cooking pits, and the occasional chatter or laughter provided subtle texture to the monotony. Not entertainment, not drama, just steady, human presence. The interplay between permanent residents and seasonal laborers is also fascinating in its subtlety. Seasonal workers arrived, worked for months, and then departed, leaving gaps in the social structure. Permanent artisans and captains adapted. Children, occasionally present with seasonal families, added minor energy and distraction. These shifts created a gentle ebb and flow within the village, a natural rhythm, neither chaotic nor perfectly ordered, but quietly alive. Sleep, naturally, was essential. Mud brick barracks, straw mats, communal spaces. Nights were filled with soft murmurs, gentle movement, occasional laughter, and the distant sounds of the desert. Rest was functional, but the rhythm of sleep allowed recovery, minor dreams, and preparation for another day of repetitive labor. The desert outside remained calm, punctuated only by wind and distant Nile reflections. Life proceeded quietly, in repetition and subtle consistency. Let's drift now to minor craft techniques, which are rarely detailed in conventional histories. Artisans had to adapt to the properties of each stone type: granite, limestone, basalt. Each material required subtle variations in pressure, chisel angle, and timing. Misjudgments could be disastrous, requiring extra effort to correct. Over decades, techniques were refined quietly, passed down from master to apprentice. These micro-adjustments, subtle and almost imperceptible, collectively shaped the final precision of the pyramids. Small personal habits were also part of the artisan's life. Some kept miniature toolkits for practice at night. Some created small practice blocks, perfecting intricate reliefs without affecting the main project. Others marked stones subtly with personal identifiers or symbols. A small signature in a corner, perhaps invisible to the casual observer, yet meaningful to the creator. A quiet human impulse to leave a trace. Now, consider minor social interactions. Workers engaged in tiny, largely invisible exchanges. A tool borrowed and returned. Advice offered quietly. Minor humor shared under breath. Observations of mistakes. These micro-interactions knit together the social fabric of the village, providing subtle comfort, minor amusement, and quiet affirmation of shared labor. Not dramatic, not storybook material, just human life, unfolding in repetition, subtlety, and quiet endurance. We can also pause to reflect on the seasonal rhythm again. During flood season, villages were lively, bustling with temporary arrivals. During the dry season, fewer seasonal workers were present, creating quieter stretches. Permanent residents adjusted, more personal time, more solitary carving, more reflection, and throughout, the pyramid itself slowly rose, a monumental but unhurried testament to persistent human effort. Weather once again played its subtle role. Scorching sun in summer, occasional dust storms, mild winters. Workers adapted quietly, learning to pace themselves, protect their skin with mud or clothing, and synchronize labor with temperature and light. Small adjustments, subtle adaptations, quietly ensuring productivity while minimizing hardship. Not dramatic heroics, just practical endurance. The quiet acknowledgement of labor persisted in subtle ways. Some workers' names appeared in minor inscriptions. Tombs near the site, modest and unobtrusive, marked the lives of particularly skilled or long-serving laborers. Tools were sometimes buried with individuals. Small tokens, bread loaves, or simple carvings provided recognition. Not fame, not glory, just acknowledgement. A whisper across time that says, "You mattered," quietly. Artisans and laborers sometimes engaged in quiet, almost imperceptible traditions. Minor celebrations for task completion. A shared loaf, a slightly stronger beer, or a soft chant to the river god. Nothing festival-like. No grand feasts. Just subtle markers in daily life. Small ways to punctuate repetition and acknowledge minor achievement. And of course, the inevitable return to monotony. The rhythm of work, the rhythm of sleep, the rhythm of meals, small interactions, minor adjustments. The ebb and flow of seasonal laborers. The subtle social hierarchies among artisans, captains, and temporary workers. A life measured in stone, sand, sweat, and barley beer. Quiet endurance, quietly acknowledged, quietly meaningful. Finally, let's drift one last time to death and remembrance. Even for workers who perished, the rhythm continued. Bodies were interred quietly. Graves were modest. Tools, bread, or minor personal items might accompany the deceased. Friends or team members might mark the site subtly, preserving memory without ceremony or spectacle. Life and death flowed together, quietly observed, rhythmically continuous. And so, as evening settles over the village once more, imagine the mud brick barracks glowing softly under fading light. Artisans finish their carving. Captains walk slowly among teams. Seasonal laborers sip the last of their beer. And children, if present, tire after a day of quiet play. The Nile glimmers faintly in the distance. Dust drifts softly. Tools are cleaned. Conversations are muted. Sleep approaches. And the rhythm of labor, life, and gentle endurance continues, unnoticed by the grand monuments towering above. It is a life of subtle monotony, quiet achievement, and enduring repetition. Not heroic, not dramatic, not celebrated in history, but profoundly human, quietly remarkable, and essential to the creation of one of the most enduring symbols of civilization. The pyramid, rising majestically, is eternal, but so too is the rhythm of the people who built it. Steady, patient, persistent, and quietly remembered in the whisper of stone, sand, and time. floating gently onward. Let's drift into the slow, almost hypnotic rhythm of seasons in the pyramid villages. Life wasn't measured in days or years alone. It was measured in floods, harvests, and the soft passage of time along the Nile. For seasonal farmers turned laborers, the rhythm of life was dictated not by Pharaoh, but by the river itself. During the flood season, fields were submerged, forcing farmers to seek temporary employment. In the villages, they arrived with families in tow, bringing subtle bursts of social energy into otherwise steady, repetitive spaces. Children ran along mud-brick alleys, their laughter faint against the background thud of chisels and sleds. Dogs and goats wandered, occasionally creating minor chaos, which was gently tolerated by captains or artisans who had learned patience over years. These seasonal influxes created temporary hierarchies, blending permanent residents with newcomers in quiet, subtle ways. The harvest season, on the other hand, was a quieter, slower period. Seasonal workers returned to their fields, leaving artisans, captains, and a smaller number of permanent laborers behind. The village shifted in energy, slower, more introspective, more methodical. Artisans could focus deeply on intricate carvings without distraction. Captains walked at a measured pace among teams, checking alignments and minor errors with calm precision. Daily life unfolded with a hypnotic regularity. Repetition, monotony, subtle satisfaction, the uncelebrated music of the desert. Minor personal stories, nearly lost to time, whisper through archaeological and textual evidence. Consider an artisan who spent years perfecting a single type of relief, a lotus flower repeated across dozens of blocks. Friends would gently tease him for obsessing, yet all respected his dedication. Another worker, a seasonal farmer, learned to carve small stones during downtime, gradually acquiring a skill that allowed him a small, quiet sense of pride among peers. These stories aren't dramatic, heroic, or tragic. They're quiet echoes of human life, unfolding slowly in the desert. Community hierarchies, subtle as they were, shaped daily rhythm. Skilled artisans had minor privileges, slightly better sleeping arrangements, access to fresher food, or priority in communal ovens. Captains maintained mild authority, guiding teams with quiet insistence, offering gentle corrections for misalignment or laziness. Once, seasonal laborers contributed strength and energy, yet were less socially influential. Small rivalries emerged. Who gets the slightly larger loaf? Whose turn it is to clean tools? Who finishes carving fastest without making a mistake? These microdrama moments were the human pulse within the monotony of labor. Let's drift over to humor, the quiet sort, the kind that doesn't interrupt rhythm but lubricates social cohesion. Workers found amusement in tiny mistakes, a sled veering off its intended path, a stone slightly misaligned, a dog stealing an onion. Artisans might exchange whispered jokes about pharaohs' grandeur, or the absurdity of dragging multi-ton blocks under the relentless sun. Not boisterous laughter, not theater, just soft, muted amusement. A human antidote to relentless repetition. Food and drink remained central. Bread, beer, onions, fish, dates, consistent, nourishing, functional. Communal meals reinforced the rhythm of the village, provided minor comfort, and allowed quiet observation of peers. Occasionally, a skilled cook would experiment subtly, adding a new herb or slight variation to bread dough. Such small acts broke the monotony and offered brief delight. Beer continued to play its quiet, dual role, nutrition and mild morale booster. Now, the craft itself deserves another slow glance. Each stone, each relief, each carved hieroglyph required precise skill. Mistakes happened. Occasionally, a block cracked, a carving chipped. Captains offered gentle corrections. Peers whispered advice. Workers learned patience, technique, and subtle adaptation. This was a quiet meditation, repeated over years, layer by layer. And while the Grand Pyramid emerged slowly, each individual's contribution remained small, almost imperceptible. Yet collectively, it was monumental. Let's float toward minor social rituals again. Births, deaths, and minor milestones were observed quietly. A worker might leave a small token at a shrine upon the birth of a child. When some did, the community marked it with modest graves and minor gestures. Bread, clay cups, a few personal items. Funerals were not ceremonial spectacles, but slow, deliberate acknowledgments of life in repetition. Life and death, intertwined softly, rhythmically, quietly, human. Seasonal rhythms influenced interactions subtly. When seasonal laborers arrived, permanent residents adapted. Minor mentoring, shared tasks, and passing along of techniques. When seasonal workers departed, villages slowed, focused, and reflected. Observing the ebb and flow of laborers across years offers a hypnotic sense of continuity. Life measured not in milestones or events, but in gentle patterns and subtle repetition. Even minor mistakes became tiny stories. A block slightly misaligned could spark a short debate among peers. Was it Ahmed's fault or the ramp? Minor misjudgments in chisel pressure might become teaching moments for apprentices. Sleds could stick in mud, ropes frayed, water supply occasionally mismanaged. These small, slow dramas were the texture of life, barely noticed outside the village, but quietly shaping human experience. Let's drift over to interactions between captains and laborers. Captains needed authority, but subtlety mattered. Too harsh, and morale dropped. Too lenient, and blocks misaligned. Most captains found a gentle middle path, firm but understated guidance, minor corrections offered with quiet tone, recognition given for consistent work. Leadership here was rhythmical, subtle, almost musical in its monotone pattern. Artisans sometimes developed minor personal habits to maintain focus. Tapping chiseled tips, lining stones with careful eye, humming soft rhythms, carving small practice blocks. These rituals were quiet, personal, and almost invisible, yet they structured days and allowed concentration over long hours. Repetition, monotony, subtle self-discipline, the true rhythm of the pyramid builder's craft. Weather again played its quiet role. Sun, heat, occasional dust storms, mild winters. Workers adapted subtly, working in shade when possible, adjusting pace to temperature, protecting skin with mud or clothing. Small, practical adaptations ensured continuity of labor. Nothing dramatic. Just daily life, quietly endured. Finally, let's drift toward the quiet satisfaction of completion. A perfectly aligned block, a smooth carving, a well-leveled ramp. Small nods of pride passed among peers. Minor celebrations, extra bread, stronger beer, whispered acknowledgement. No fanfare, no monuments, just subtle satisfaction, quietly human, quietly profound. And as evening descends on the village, imagine the soft glow of mud brick barracks in fading light. Artisans polish tools. Captains walk slowly among teams. Children, if present, tire from play. and the Nile glimmers faintly in the distance. Conversation is low, steps are slow, and the village settles into quiet reflection. Tools are cleaned, beers sipped, minor disputes resolved. Sleep approaches, and tomorrow the slow rhythm begins again. Stone, sand, sweat, and subtle human continuity. In these quiet, hypnotic cycles, we glimpse the enduring story of the pyramid builders. Not dramatic, not heroic in conventional terms, but steady, persistent, and profoundly human. Individual lives were small, repetitive, sometimes painful, sometimes amusing, always quiet. Yet together, they created a monument that endures through millennia, a testament to the subtle power of patience, endurance, and repetition. Drifting gently onward, let's linger on the lives of individual workers, those almost invisible faces behind the massive stones. Not pharaoh, not generals, not the architects who designed ramps and alignments. No, tonight we focus on the quietly remarkable people, whose names largely escaped history, yet whose daily lives were full of small stories, subtle frustrations, and tiny victories. Consider Nefru, an artisan whose specialty was carving hieroglyphic symbols on live, stone panels. He spent hours, sometimes days, perfecting a single glyph. When completed, it looked effortless, precise, almost magical. But behind that precision was repetition, fatigue, and minor missteps. Once, a misaligned chisel strike forced him to redo an entire panel. He muttered quietly under his breath, adjusted his stance, and began again. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just human patience and quiet endurance. Or imagine Khepri, a seasonal laborer who arrived with the annual flood. He was strong, reliable, and slightly awkward, often tripping over uneven ground or his own feet while hauling stones. His teammates teased him gently, mostly in affectionate ways. "Khepri, you're turning the sled into a zigzag," they murmured. He grinned, wiped sweat from his brow, and continued. There was humor here, subtle and quiet, woven into repetition and monotony. Small human interactions softened the relentless work. Let's float toward the minor rivalries that punctuated village life. Artisans competed quietly. Who could carve the smoothest relief, finish the most blocks, or achieve the most precise alignment? Seasonal laborers occasionally engaged in contests over speed or efficiency, dragging sleds uphill, stacking stones without error. Captains noticed these minor contests, offering subtle praise or additional responsibilities. Not recognition by Pharaoh, not glory, just subtle acknowledgement in the rhythm of daily life. Food rituals, gentle and repeated, provided structure and comfort. Workers broke bread together, often with small variations in seasoning or technique. Beer, the ever-present companion, served as nutrition and morale. Some workers saved a small portion of bread or a cup of beer for personal reflection, a minor ritual marking accomplishment at day's end. These tiny acts were comforting, almost meditative, quietly threading personal experience into the collective rhythm of labor. Let's consider minor frustrations. The desert heat, sunburn, dust, and repetitive strain created continual irritation. A chisel might break, a rope fray, a stone shift unexpectedly. Captains had to balance patience with gentle insistence. Minor disputes arose over tool usage, sleeping arrangements, or workload distribution. Nothing dramatic. No shouting matches. Just soft tensions, quickly resolved, quietly shaping daily rhythm and social cohesion. And yet, within these frustrations were minor triumphs. Nefru finally perfected a particularly tricky relief. Khepri managed to haul a heavier stone without tripping. A captain noticed subtle improvements in team coordination. These victories were tiny, easily overlooked by history, but deeply meaningful to the people themselves. Satisfaction arose not from spectacle, but from quiet mastery over repetitive, demanding tasks. Seasonal festivals added subtle bursts of life to the monotony. Not grand events, but quiet celebrations. Minor offerings to gods, small ceremonies marking the start or end of work cycles, communal meals enhanced with slight variations in ingredients. Perhaps a song or soft chant accompanied labor, providing rhythm and gentle encouragement. Nothing dramatic, just humans seeking meaning, comfort, and shared rhythm in daily existence. Small superstitions also shaped behavior. Workers occasionally whispered prayers for safe lifting, steady ramps, or precise carving. A minor talisman might be carried, or a token placed discreetly at a worksite. These practices were subtle, personal, sometimes unnoticed by others, but they provided reassurance, psychological comfort, and minor structure in the endlessly repetitive labor of pyramid construction. Let's float over to interactions between permanent residents and seasonal workers. When seasonal workers arrived, permanent artisans and captains gently mentored them. Advice was shared quietly. Adjust the sled angle slightly. Chisel with a gentler touch. Minor corrections, minor guidance, quietly passing knowledge. Seasonal W. Workers learned, adapted, and contributed. And when the season ended, the knowledge returned home, creating subtle ripple effects across villages. Skills, techniques, and minor innovations quietly diffused throughout the Nile Valley. Children in the village added intermittent bursts of energy. They weren't allowed in hazardous areas, but they played quietly in corners, occasionally delivering minor messages, fetching water, or entertaining adults. These interactions were soft interruptions in the rhythm of labor, providing gentle human texture without disrupting workflow. The presence of children, small and quiet, helped maintain social cohesion and reminded adults of life beyond the stones. Let's drift to the long-term endurance of these workers. Skeletons show healed fractures, worn joints, and chronic strain. Evidence suggests remarkable resilience, decades of labor under extreme conditions, repeated cycles of effort and minor recovery, and continued skill development. Their bodies bore testimony to their lives, subtle records of human persistence, endurance, and quiet adaptation. Not heroic in the conventional sense, not celebrated in grand history, yet remarkable nonetheless. Minor craft techniques, repeated endlessly, reveal subtle human ingenuity, adjusting chisel angles, predicting stone fractures, aligning blocks with near-perfect precision. Techniques were refined over months and years. Errors became lessons. Mistakes became subtly corrected. These small, persistent improvements contributed to the overall precision of the pyramid. Quiet mastery accumulated over time, invisible to casual observation, yet monumental in effect. Even minor injuries were met with quiet care. Fellow workers assisted each other, applied simple poultices, or adjusted tasks to allow healing. Captains might subtly reassign work, ensuring continued productivity without endangering recovery. Life in the village required small-scale mutual aid, quietly organized and rhythmically in fun. RCD, die. Not heroic, not dramatic, but deeply human. Finally, imagine the quiet ending of a day in the village. Mud brick barracks glow softly in sunset. Tools are cleaned. Bread is eaten. Beer is sipped. Conversations drift. Gentle laughter, occasionally punctuating monotony. Seasonal workers rest before returning home. Permanent artisans retire to their small spaces, polishing minor carvings, tidying materials, reflecting on small accomplishments. Captains walk slowly among teams, checking alignment, observing quietly, and the Nile, as always, glimmers gently in the distance. In this quiet hypnotic cycle, the pyramid rises slowly, stone by stone, day by day. Laborers endure. Artisans perfect. Captains guide. Seasonal workers come and go. Children play. Minor rituals punctuate repetition. Mistakes are corrected. Triumphs acknowledged. Food, beer, sleep, and subtle human interaction form the rhythm of life. And the pyramid endures. Monumental, eternal, and silent. Yet equally enduring is the quiet, repetitive, profoundly human rhythm of the people who built it. Not heroic in conventional history, not celebrated in stories, but remarkable in patient, persistent, repetitive existence. Stone, sand, sweat, and small human triumphs echo through millennia. So, drifting gently toward the close of our journey, let's settle into the final reflections on the pyramid builders. After months, years, and decades of repetitive labor, the stones finally align. The ramps settle into place, and the massive shape of the pyramid rises against the desert sky. It is easy to marvel at its sheer scale, its geometry, its grandeur. But the real story, the quiet, hypnotic, often invisible story, lies in the people who labored endlessly to make it real. Consider, for a moment, the endurance required. Daily life consisted of hauling, carving, adjusting, correcting, and repeating. Mistakes were frequent, fatigue constant, yet the rhythm persisted. There were no heroic moments in the cinematic sense. No dramatic speeches, no sudden breakthroughs. Just patient repetition, quiet adaptation, and the subtle satisfaction of mastery. This endurance, repeated across thousands of workers and decades, was the true achievement. Monumental not in spectacle but in persistence. Artisans like Nefru, laborers like Kepri, captains guiding with quiet authority. These were the invisible architects of eternity. Their lives, small and often unnoticed, shaped something enduring. Every chipped edge corrected, every subtle alignment perfected, every minor ritual observed quietly in the sun and dust, contributed to a collective creation. And while history seldom names them, archaeology whispers their presence across millennia. The seasonal rhythm of work and life also deserves attention. Floods brought new faces, minor disruptions, and bursts of energy. Harvests returned laborers to their fields, leaving the village quieter, slower, more introspective. This ebb and flow created a hypnotic, meditative pace of life. Laborers adjusted, adapted, and maintained skill. Artisans honed their craft. Captains maintained order without overt control. And all this was orchestrated under the gentle but unyielding eye of the Nile. Even minor rituals mattered. Bread shared communally, beer consumed for nutrition and morale, soft chants or whispered prayers, personal charms and tokens for protection. These small acts punctuated repetition, provided psychological comfort, and created subtle cohesion. They were quiet acknowledgments that, yes, life is repetitive, often challenging, but meaningful nonetheless. Small human gestures threaded through the daily monotony, quietly affirming existence. And while frustration, mistakes, and minor rivalries punctuated life, they too contributed to rhythm. Misaligned blocks, frayed ropes, chisel errors, minor disputes, all created opportunities for subtle human growth. Advice was shared, techniques refined, patience exercised. Small triumphs emerged, a perfect ply-aligned stone, a smooth relief, a sled hauled without incident. These micro-victories were private, often unnoticed by anyone beyond the village, yet profoundly human. Children, quietly present, reminded adults of life beyond stone and sand. They brought fleeting joy, intermittent distraction, and soft energy to the rhythm of work. Seasonal workers introduced new techniques and perspectives, leaving subtle impressions even as they departed. Captains provided gentle structure, ensuring order while avoiding excessive interference. And permanent artisans cultivated skill, patience, and personal pride through slow, steady repetition. Death, naturally, was part of the cycle. Workers were buried quietly, modestly, with small tokens or tools. Funerals were subdued. Life and death intertwined seamlessly in the daily rhythm. Even as individual names faded, the collective memory persisted in stone, sand, and subtle archaeological traces. Their legacy was neither celebrated nor spectacular, but enduring, patient, and profound. Now, consider the subtle psychological texture of the village. Laborers endured under the relentless sun. Dust swirled constantly. Repetition dominated. Yet moments of quiet amusement, soft teasing, whispered advice, gentle recognition, communal meals, and minor rituals softened monotony. Life, though repetitive and often challenging, contained small pleasures and affirmations. Endurance itself became a quiet form of art, subtle but profoundly human. The Nile, silent and unchanging, mirrored this rhythm. Its floods dictated work, its ebb created opportunity for reflection. Workers measured life, not in calendars or milestones, but in river cycles, food cycles, and daily rhythms. Seasonal changes, minor rituals, craft refinement, and subtle social interactions combined to form a hypnotic continuity. This was life measured not by spectacle, but by endurance and quiet repetition. And the pyramid itself, massive, eternal, yet unchanging, stands as a sigil. NT witness to these rhythms. It is easy to focus on geometry, scale, and architectural precision. But the true monument is in the human persistence that shaped it. Each stone, each relief, each minor adjustment represents quiet mastery, repetition, and patience. The grand shape is impressive, but the subtle story of human endurance is quietly extraordinary. Let's pause on reflection. Imagine the village as the sun sets. Mud brick barracks glowing faintly in twilight. Tools cleaned, meals consumed, beer sipped, children asleep. Seasonal workers departed. Permanent artisans, polishing minor carvings, captains observing alignment, the Nile shimmering in the distance. Minor triumphs acknowledged, minor frustrations resolved. Sleep approaching, and tomorrow the rhythm continues. Not dramatic, not celebrated. Just persistent, quiet, and profoundly human. So, floating gently toward conclusion, what can we take from this story? Perhaps it is that monumental achievement does not always stem from heroic spectacle. Often, it arises from quiet, repetitive, patient human labor. Mistakes corrected slowly, skills honed gradually, rituals observed subtly, minor triumphs accumulating over decades. The lives of pyramid builders, largely invisible to history, remind us that persistence, endurance, and subtle human engagement can create something enduring and profoundly meaningful. And as we drift finally into gentle reflection, imagine the desert at night, the pyramids silhouetted against stars, the village quiet, bathed in moonlight, workers resting, dreams soft and repetitive, the Nile flowing endlessly, indifferent yet essential. Stone, sand, sweat, minor rituals, small victories, all interwoven into a quiet, hypnotic rhythm. And though their names may be lost, the presence of these humans persists in the enduring monuments they helped create. So tonight, as you settle into comfort, perhaps consider the rhythm of the pyramid builders' lives. Repetitive, patient, subtle, and quiet. Lie, heroic. Not celebrated in songs or histories. Not marked by spectacle or sudden drama, but enduring nonetheless. Stone by stone, day by day, breath by breath. And in that quiet, hypnotic repetition, there is something profoundly human, patiently monumental, and quietly eternal. And with that gentle reflection, let us close our tale. The pyramids rise silently, the desert stretches beyond, and the rhythm of human life continues quietly in memory, in stone, and in the gentle, hypnotic flow of history. Sleep well, drift gently, and remember, sometimes endurance itself is the most remarkable story.